Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Holy Trinity Church in Maisons-Laffitte. And this is the sermon for the 7th Sunday after Trinity. And you can find the readings in the description box below. It's been very hot here again, and I don't know about you, but one of the things that I just like to spend the afternoons when it's too hot to be outside is just getting deep into a book. Reading a book, and one of the books that I've recently finished is a remarkable story by Jacques Sullivan. It's called And Then There Was Light. And Sullivan lost his sight at the age of 8, and a bit later on he joins the French resistance during the Second World War. He was then arrested by the Gestapo and eventually deported to a concentration camp. The book is an extraordinary story of courage and hope in the darkest of circumstances. But one passage that stayed with me long after I finished the book was how Sullivan reflected on how often people made instant judgments about one another while in the concentration camp. They would decide who was trustworthy and who was not, who was brave, who was weak. And yet, time after time, those judgments, those instant judgments, proved wrong. The person who seemed strongest would crumble under pressure. Someone who appeared very timid would show extraordinary courage. Again and again, he discovered that people were far more complicated than they first appeared. And his conclusion was simple. Most of us are trying to make sense of people when we only have a fraction of the information. We see a moment and we imagine that we know the whole story. That observation could almost be a commentary on today's gospel. The servants look out over the field and immediately think that they know what they are seeing. There's wheat and there's weeds. The weeds must go. The solution appears obvious. They say, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" It's a practical question, and it's exactly the sort of thing that most of us would ask. "Shall I go and pull up those weeds for you?" But no, the farmer refuses. Leave them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. The surprise is not that there are weeds growing in that field, because anyone who's ever done any sort of gardening at all knows that weeds are simply part of life, aren't they? The surprise is the farmer's patience. He's willing to live with a situation that is incomplete and unresolved. The servants, however, they want immediate action, don't they? Let's do something about this. But no, the farmer asks them just to wait. And perhaps that's where this parable begins to touch a nerve, because most of us do not enjoy waiting. We want clarity, we want loose ends all neatly tied up and uncertainty removed. We want to see the end of the story while we're still living in the middle of it. Yet Jesus suggests that life in the kingdom is often lived before the harvest and not after it. We see only part of the picture. We do not know the end of the story. Like Sullivan's fellow prisoners, we are constantly tempted to draw conclusions from only limited information. That can be frustrating for us because we live in a world that promises answers, instant answers. We can track a parcel to our front door. We can check next week's weather. We can find information about almost anything in a matter of seconds. Yet some of the most important questions in life remain stubbornly beyond our grasp. What is God doing in this situation, we think? Why has this happened? How is this going to turn out? That's where Paul's words to the Romans are so honest. He doesn't pretend that Christian faith removes all uncertainty. Quite the opposite, actually. He says that the whole of creation is groaning. The world is not yet what God intends it to be. We are not yet what God intends us to be. There is a sense in which all creation is waiting. And Paul compares creation to a woman in labour. And labour pains are real and exhausting and painful, but they are not meaningless. They are part of a story, of a situation that is still unfolding. And Paul is saying that the frustration and the longings of this present age are not signs that God has abandoned his creation. They are just signs that his work is not yet complete. And that's a very different perspective from the one that the servants have in the parable. They want everything resolved now. God is working towards a future that they cannot see. And perhaps that's why the psalm is so important. I love this psalm. It's one of my favourites. Psalm 139 reminds us that while we do not see clearly, God does. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. Before a word is on our tongue, God knows it completely. He knows when we sit and when we rise. He knows our fears, our hopes, and the things that keep us awake at night. There is nowhere that we can go where he is not already present. The farmer in the parable can afford to be patient because he knows the field. God can afford to be patient because he knows us. What appears confusing to us is not confusing to him. What feels unfinished to us is not unfinished to him, because he sees the beginning and the end together. That does not mean we always understand what he is doing, but it does mean we can trust the one who does. The most challenging part of the psalm, I think, comes right at the end. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. It's a brave prayer because it shifts the focus. You see, the servants are concerned about identifying the weeds. King David, who's thought to have written this psalm, is concerned about his own heart. That is often the harder task. It's much easier to analyse other people than to examine ourselves, much easier to decide what needs fixing elsewhere than to invite God to work within us. Yet that is where spiritual growth begins, not with certainty about everyone else, but with openness before God. And this is where today's readings become very practical indeed. Because if we are honest, many of us spend a great deal of our lives trying to do the farmer's job for him. We carry responsibilities that were never ours in the first place. We worry about outcomes that we cannot control. We try to manage situations that are actually beyond our reach. We spend energy trying to secure a future that remains firmly in God's hands. I know that temptation myself. You know, when life feels uncertain, my instinct is often to worry harder, work harder, try harder, as though enough effort might eventually produce some form of certainty. Yet certainty is not what Jesus offers the servants, what he offers them is trust. The servants want to take control of the harvest. The farmer asks them to leave it well alone, because the outcome belongs to God. The harvest belongs to God. Our task is not to bring forward the ending, but to be faithful in the meantime. That sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest lessons of discipleship. The Apostle Paul says, hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. And that's not passive resignation, it's active trust. It's choosing to believe that God is still at work, even when we cannot yet see the finished picture. Perhaps the question that we might take away this morning is actually very simple. For each of us it will be different, but maybe it's, what am I carrying today that really belongs to God? Or what situation am I currently trying to control? What field am I trying to weed when Jesus has actually told me to wait? There is a strange freedom in remembering that we are not the farmer. We are not responsible for bringing in the harvest. We are not responsible for knowing how every story must end. We are simply called to be faithful. We are called to pray today's prayers, to love today's people, and to take the next step that God has placed before us. The servants wanted certainty. The farmer asked for trust. 2,000 years later, I suspect he's still asking the same thing of us. Amen. Have a good week, my friends.